Communications.
I'm a plumber and I'm on site for a job, and we we're snaking a drain, and we've been pulling back. We probably pulled back about 10 pounds, 15 pounds of it looks like flesh type of stuff, meat, and we don't know what it is.
When these plumbers were called out to a quiet Ontario neighborhood in December 2017, they expected it to be a routine job. A block drain is usually a simple fix. The plumbers brought their drain snake with them, an essential plumbing tool made up of a long wire with a corkscrew end. If the blockage wasn't substantial, it shouldn't have taken them longer than an hour with this specialist tool, but they encountered a problem. After several days of blocked pipes, the neighbors were getting antsy. They wanted a quick and easy fix to the problem. But what the plumbers discovered in the drains was anything but quick and easy. There grew some discovery would have police descending upon the area, turning it into a crime scene. The plumbers had discovered evidence of a grisly murder with far-reaching consequences and body parts callously flushed down the toilet. This is the chilling story of Adam Strong. Let's start with Rori Hachie. She was born in July 1999 in Oshawa, a quiet suburb in Ontario, Canada. She was a bright and spirited kid with a fondness for animals. And the elderly, she kept herself busy outside of school as an Army cadet. And by the age of 13, she had received the Cadet of the Year title twice. But when she entered high school a year later, things took a turn for the worse. As a 14-year-old freshman, she was offered crystal meth. She accepted it, the first mistake in what would go on to be a years-long struggle with addiction, as only a teenager. Rori came from a troubled background. Her grandfather was Bernie Guindon, otherwise known as Bernie the Frog, the founder of Satan's Choice Motorcycle Club, which was for a time the second largest biker club in the world. As an outlaw biker with drug and assault convictions, he'd served 22 years in prison and had anywhere between 11 and 16 children. One of these was Rori's uncle, Harley Davidson Guindon, who owned a clothing store in Oshawa. Rori and her uncle were close. Harley himself was a Hells Angels biker. Still, he had a soft spot for his teenage niece. In 2016, when she was 17, Rori lived with Harley and his family while he was under house arrest on drug charges. Rori's mother, Shannon Dion, had reported herself to the Children's Aid Society because she thought it was the only way to get Rori the help she needed with her addiction. The services didn't help, but Rori managed to turn her life around on her own. The last 6 months of her life were positive ones. Rori had a boyfriend, Tony, and even her own apartment. Harley had recently given her and her mother $1,000 to help with living expenses, but Rori had found a job of her own and returned to school. Things were looking up. In August 2017, her aunt, Michelle Guindon, took her to a drugstore to buy a pregnancy test. It came back positive. Rori was pregnant, and she wanted to keep the baby. She was looking forward to motherhood. However, at the end of that same month, things took a tragic turn. An unexplained fire broke out in Rori's mother's house, injuring Shannon and killing her dog. This may have been the triggering event in Rori's downward spiral. Rori was a regular at a youth center called The Refuge. Workers there noted that she had recently relapsed into drug use, though in August, they believed she was improving. A few days before the end of August, Harley met with Rori and noticed something different about her. Rori seemed reluctant to talk about what was going on with her and appeared cornered and secretive. Harley described her hug as heartbreaking, the largest hug she had ever given him, one that felt like a final goodbye. On August 29, 2017, Rori's friend and the friend's mom took her to the hospital. The exact reason is unknown, but she was described as having had some sort of mental episode. CCTV captured them sitting in the waiting room. Shortly after, the friend and the friend's mom left the hospital, leaving Rori alone. She sat in the waiting room for 15 minutes, but then left before she could be examined by a doctor. Footage shows her leaving the hospital alone. This was the last time Rori was seen alive. When she didn't show up at the refuge for several days, her friends and guidance counselor grew worried. Together with her family, they raised the alarm. Some believed she had skipped town, reverting to old habits, but her closest family was certain she wouldn't do that now. Despite her recent troubles, she was pregnant and in a stable relationship. They knew something was wrong. On September 11th, 2017, Rori's story took a horrifying turn. It was a pleasant evening at Oshawa Harbor. A grandfather and his 11-year-old grandson were fishing on the pier when they noticed something strange in the water. At first, it appeared to be a piece of trash, so they cast their lines toward it to remove it from the lake. After about half an hour, they managed to reel it in close enough to catch it with a net and haul it onto the pier. Initially, one of them thought it might be an animal, possibly a chicken, but they soon realized the truth was far worse. The grandfather recalls saying, "I think that's a body." The item retrieved from the lake was a female torso. When the police arrived, they determined it showed signs of trauma and had been deliberately severed from the rest of the body. Somebody had killed a woman and dumped her remains. Police took the torso away to be identified. "We would probably reach out to other services to see if there are any unsolved missing person investigations," they said. But Lake Ontario is a huge area, and the police couldn't rule out that it had been carried to Oshawa from somewhere else. The absence of the pelvis from the torso made identification more difficult, and the condition of the torso made it challenging to determine whether the victim had been pregnant. It took time for the police to compare the torso's DNA with DNA supplied by Rori's family and confirm a match. The severed torso belonged to Rori Hachie, and her missing persons case had turned into a murder investigation. But how had her torso ended up in the lake? Who had killed her, and horrifyingly, where was the rest of her body? There were no leads. The lake had washed away any evidence that could point to the perpetrator, and Rori's final movements were a mystery. They didn't know how long she had been in the lake, or how long she had been alive after leaving the hospital waiting room. Whom had she met? What had they done to her? There were no leads. The lake had washed away any evidence that could point to the perpetrator, and Rori's final movements were a mystery. They didn't know how long she had been in the lake or how long she had been alive after leaving the hospital waiting room. Whom had she met? What had they done to her? For now, the police didn't know, and the family settled down anxiously to wait. They waited until the police were notified of a grim discovery by an Oshawa plumber. The plumbers were called out about a pipe blockage by a couple in an upstairs rental apartment. The blockage had lasted several days, and the busy spot along the Oshawa Harbor waterfront became a disturbing crime scene. A fisherman and his grandson discovered a torso in the water. The discovery raised many questions. Who was this woman? Where did she come from? Who wanted her dead? It wasn't until November 10th, nearly 2 months later, that police matched the torso's DNA with DNA provided by Rori's family. The severed torso was confirmed to belong to Rori Hachie, turning her missing person case into a murder investigation. Questions lingered. How did her torso end up in the lake? Who killed her? And horrifyingly, where was the rest of her body? The lake had washed away evidence that could point to the perpetrator. Rori's final movements were a mystery. Police didn't know how long she had been in the lake or how long she had lived after leaving the hospital waiting room. Who had she met? What had they done to her? The family anxiously waited for answers. On December 28, 2017, police were notified of a grim discovery by an Oshawa plumber. The plumbers had been called to address a pipe blockage by a couple in an upstairs rental apartment. The blockage had lasted several days. The building's other resident, Adam Strong, who lived in the basement suite, had been unable to resolve it despite asking for a plumbing snake. He claimed an inflated condom was blocking the drain. The upstairs neighbors eventually called the plumbers, who traced the blockage to Strong's apartment. Upon entering the basement suite, they were greeted by a nauseating stench. Strong appeared nervous, commenting that the state of the drains was vile. As the plumbers snaked the pipes, they made a horrifying discovery. The material coming out of the pipes was suspected to be human flesh. The plumbers, shocked and horrified, immediately contacted the police. The police arrived shortly afterward and began investigating the grisly discovery. Resident of the building, the man who lived in the basement suite, Adam Strong, hadn't been able to do anything about it, though he'd asked the upstairs neighbor for a plumbing snake to clear it. He told them it was an inflated condom blocking the drain. The upstairs neighbors took it upon themselves to call the plumbers. The source of the blockage was the downstairs apartment, which Strong had been renting for over a decade. So the plumbers knocked on Strong's door. The basement suite was filled with a nauseating stench. Strong seemed nervous, commenting that the state of the drains was vile. And as we know, as the plumbers snaked the pipes, they found something awful: knives by the bed. The police arrived shortly afterward. They suspected that the material coming out of the pipes was human flesh. The plumbers were horrified by what they'd stumbled upon and the awareness that they'd spent so many hours in contact with this man. Because when the police knocked on Strong's door, he opened it and said almost immediately, "The jig's up. It's a body." They arrested him instantly. While in the squad car outside, he continued to be talkative. He said, "If you want, the rest of her is in my freezer, and she's pretty defleshed." With a mounting feeling of horror, the officers opened the freezer. Inside, they found various severed body parts. These included a human head. On the neck was tattooed the word "alive," the same tattoo Rori had. These were Rori Hachie's body parts. Her autopsy revealed multiple facial injuries and 2 fractures. The exact cause of death was not certain. She had drugs in her system, but there was no way of determining the quantity. It was also suggested that she might have been strangled or died from blunt force trauma. Whatever the case, she had died in a horrible attack. You said to the officers, "If you're looking for the rest of her, you'll find her in the freezer." My question to you is, the person in that freezer, Rori? I'd been planning to answer that question. These things can go on for hours. Is that true? It can. It's true. The police didn't get anywhere interviewing Strong. Though he had previously been talkative, almost bragging about the human remains found on his property, they turned back to his apartment to search for more evidence. It was extremely messy and cluttered. They found a number of restraining devices and adult toys alongside weapons like a hammer. On this hammer, they found Rori's DNA. They also found Rori's running shoes in a plastic bag with what appeared to be blood spatter on them. Blood spatter was also found on the wall and the bottom baseboards leading into Strong's bedroom. There was evidence of other crimes, too. Strong's online search history documented his obsession with extreme gore and death. This interest had crossed over into the real world in alarming ways. They found an undetonated pipe bomb, which required the bomb squad to safely detonate it. Tonight, a loud bang in the heart of an Oshawa neighborhood. The controlled explosion of a suspicious package at the scene of a suspicious death investigation for Durham Regional Police. Perhaps most damningly, they found a specialty knife in the knife drawer. It was the sort of knife used by hunters to cut and skin animals, the sort of knife that could have been used for Rori's dismemberment. They checked this knife for Rori's DNA, but what they found on it blew the case wide open. It was the DNA of another victim. This second victim was 19-year-old Candace Fitzpatrick. Candace was born in 1989. Not much is known about her, except for her similarities to Rori. She too was often out on the streets in Oshawa, and also had a drug problem. However, she had a loving family, just like Rori did. That family had been looking for her for nearly 10 years, ever since she went missing in March 2008. Another missing female at the time was identified as Candace Fitzpatrick from the Oshawa area. Her family had reported to the DRPS in 2010 their concerns about her not having been seen since 2008. She was 18 years old at the time. I felt from the beginning that this was a seasoned person who had done this before because my daughter was tough. She was very tough, and she would not have been an easy catch for anybody to handle. I knew he knew what he was doing. Finally, they had a clue as to what had happened to her. and it was nothing good. They had Candace's DNA on the knife, but they found no sign of her body. They went back to Strong. Initially, he wanted to talk about Rori. He revealed a callous, cruel attitude toward her death and the way he dismembered her. He said he'd begun on Christmas Eve 2017 because that was when the neighbors were away. "So the 24th is when you start?" "Yes," he said. "Are you doing this while it's frozen or partially defrosted?" "Completely defrosted," he replied. They had already charged Strong with committing an indignity to a dead body. He believed that as long as they stuck to this line of questioning about the practicalities of what he'd done after Rori was dead, he was safe from any other charges. But the more he told the detectives, the more they could push him to reveal more incriminating details. The more a judge could infer about what Strong had done to Rori while she was alive, the graver the case against him became. Strong did not give an actual confession to either murder, Rori's or Candace's. However, he did admit to knowing Rori, having had dinner with her, and that she had been to his apartment on more than one occasion. He confessed to dismembering Rori's body after her death and expressed surprise that her torso had been found in the lake, remarking that he didn't think it should have floated. He also described the months it took him to dispose of her body parts as a result of procrastination. Similarly, he blamed the knife with Candace's DNA on it on procrastination, admitting that he should have disposed of it as it might have prevented him from being caught. Strong admitted to having known Candace, and the combination of this admission with the DNA evidence was enough for police to charge him with both murders in November 2018. A year after Rori's torso had been identified. Without a confession, prosecutors focused on Strong's character and history. Born in 1972, Strong was 45 when plumbers discovered Rori's remains. He worked as a gas station attendant and an occasional security guard on film sets. Little is known about his early life, though he claimed to have had a bad childhood, blaming it for his actions. "They are my actions, but I don't think I would have made those actions had I been nurtured," he said. Strong also had a troubling history with women. Prosecutors called 2 women to the stand who had relationships with him decades earlier. One described consensual bondage and choking, while the other said she had felt frightened for her safety. This painted a picture of an aggressive and cruel person. The defense tried to argue that the women may have overdosed and that Strong panicked, disposing of their bodies to avoid blame. However, Rori's head injuries told a different story. Strong's behavior during the trial only added to the court's distaste. The proceedings, conducted largely via video link during the pandemic, were delayed repeatedly by Strong's refusal to cooperate. He even complained of being tired and wanting to sleep, refusing to meet with his lawyer. His arrogance did little to help his case. Finally, on March 16, 2021, after numerous delays, Strong was convicted of first-degree murder in Rori Hasett's death and manslaughter in Candace Fitzpatrick's case. This was a remarkable outcome given that Candace's body had never been recovered and that Strong had not confessed to either murder. His confession to dismemberment, combined with DNA evidence, proved sufficient. The murder conviction carried an automatic life sentence. In July 2021, Strong admitted to a prison guard the location of Candace's remains. He led police to an intersection in Oshawa, where they recovered her body, providing long-awaited closure for her family. A family member expressed, "We're barely surviving a year and a half going through this. I couldn't imagine 10 years. I've met that family in person. There's no way they didn't report that child missing. They're good-hearted people. They're crushed. This has slaughtered us all." Strong's sentence carries risks for him. Rori's family's connections to biker gangs, including Bernie Gwindon, founder of Satan's Choice Motorcycle Club, mean Strong is a marked man. "You can't kill a biker's granddaughter and get away with it," one convict remarked. The exact details of how Strong met these women, or why he murdered them, remain unclear. Prosecutors theorized that these were crimes of opportunity and that he likely kidnapped them off the street. The decade-long gap between the murders of Candace and Rori raises haunting questions about what other crimes Strong might have committed in that time. What do you think about this horrible story? How could Strong's crimes have gone undetected for so long? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe, keep up with our channel, and we'll see you very soon on the crime scenes.